Africa's largest dam. Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The people of Ethiopia have displayed remarkable patriotism and unity by funding the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam entirely through their own contributions. From buying bonds to donating from every corner of the country and even from Ethiopians abroad, they turned a national dream into reality without relying on foreign aid. Their collective determination and sacrifice make the dam a true symbol of Ethiopian pride and self-reliance. The Nile. The longest river in the world. A river that has been the heartbeat of Africa for thousands of years. From the green highlands of Ethiopia to the deserts of Sudan and Egypt, the Nile has carried life, hope, and survival. Ancient civilizations rose along its banks. The pyramids of Egypt, the farmlands of Sudan, and the mountains of Ethiopia all owe their existence to this single river. But today, the Nile is at the center of a great story. A story of ambition and fear. A story of hope and conflict. A story about one giant project, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD. To some, this dam is a miracle. To others, it is a threat. To all, it is a test of cooperation. Ethiopia before the dam. For generations, Ethiopia lived in the shadow of poverty. It is a country rich in rivers and mountains, yet poor in energy. More than half of its people lived without electricity. Imagine being a student in Ethiopia 10 years ago. When the sun went down, your schoolwork stopped. No lamp, no light, just darkness. A small candle could burn for a while, but smoke filled the house and your eyes watered as you tried to read. Imagine mothers walking for hours to collect firewood, because there was no power to cook meals. Imagine hospitals struggling to run machines because electricity came and went without warning. Imagine factories silent, jobs lost, and dreams delayed, all because of energy poverty. This was Ethiopia's reality. A proud nation, but one forced to live in the dark. The birth of a dream. In 2011, Ethiopia decided to change its future. On the Blue Nile River, just 30 kilometers from Sudan's border, construction began on one of the biggest projects in Africa's history, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. It would rise 145 meters high. Stretch 1.8 kilometers across. Its reservoir would hold 74 billion cubic meters of water, almost the entire annual flow of the Blue Nile. And when complete, its turbines would produce 6,450 megawatts of electricity. Enough to light up every village in Ethiopia. Enough to export power to neighbors. Enough to fuel factories, schools, hospitals, and new industries. What made GERD even more remarkable was how it was built. Ethiopia did not rely on foreign loans. 91% of the money came from Ethiopians themselves. Civil servants gave a month's salary. Ordinary people bought bonds. Ethiopians abroad sent donations. It was not just a project. It was a national mission. A symbol of unity. A statement that Ethiopia would rise. For Ethiopia, GERD became more than concrete and turbines. It was dignity. It was independence. It was hope. The promise of light. As the dam rose, Ethiopia's dreams grew. Millions of homes could finally have electricity. Students could study at night. Hospitals could keep medicines cold. Farmers could irrigate their crops with electric pumps. For the first time in history, Ethiopia could even export power to Sudan, Djibouti, Kenya, and beyond. Electricity would not just light homes. It would bring money for roads, schools, and industries. Ethiopia even looked to the future, cheap electricity for digital technology, manufacturing, and even new sectors like Bitcoin mining. For a country that had long been associated with famine and poverty, GERD was a chance to rewrite its story. Sudan's mixed feelings. Sudan, Ethiopia's neighbor, had complicated feelings about GERD. On the one hand, the dam could be a blessing. For years, floods from the Nile destroyed farms and homes in Sudan. GERD could regulate these floods, making the river more predictable. Farmers could plan better, irrigation would improve, and Sudan could even buy cheap electricity from Ethiopia. But Sudan also had fears. What if Ethiopia released water suddenly? What if the dam was mismanaged? Sudan's own dams, like Rosaires, could be overwhelmed. And if GERD ever broke, Sudan would be the first victim downstream. So Sudan demanded guarantees, real-time data, clear rules for water releases, and strong safety measures. It wanted cooperation, not surprises. Egypt's existential fear. For Egypt, GERD was a nightmare. Egypt depends on the Nile for 97% of its water. Without the Nile, Egypt is only desert. 95% of Egyptians live along the river, growing wheat, rice, and food for over 100 million people. Egypt feared that as Ethiopia filled GERD's giant reservoir, less water would flow downstream. A reduction of just a few billion cubic meters could destroy Egyptian farms, reduce food, and cut drinking water supplies. Egypt called the dam an existential threat. For them, it was not just about water, it was about survival itself. Egypt also pointed to history. Colonial treaties from 1902 and 1959 had given most of the Nile's water to Egypt and Sudan. These treaties required consent from downstream countries before any upstream projects were built. Ethiopia never signed those agreements, but Egypt still defended them. For Cairo, GERD was not just about today's water. It was about keeping control of the river tomorrow. Talks and deadlocks. From 2011 onwards, Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia sat around negotiating tables. Mediators came from the United States, the African Union, and even the Gulf states. In 2015, the three countries signed a declaration of principles, agreeing to work together. But the details, how fast Ethiopia could fill the reservoir, how much water to release in drought years, how disputes would be solved, remained unsettled. Egypt wanted a legally binding agreement. Sudan wanted safety guarantees. Ethiopia insisted it had already compromised by filling the dam slowly. The talks ended again and again in deadlock. A warning from history: Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. To understand Egypt and Sudan's fears, Africans must look at another story. The story of Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. On the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Turkey built more than 20 dams under what it called the GAP project. These dams gave Turkey electricity and irrigation. But they stopped the flow of water downstream into Syria and Iraq to nothing. For Iraq, the effects were devastating. The mighty rivers that once fed Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, began to shrink. Farms dried up. Marshes turned into desert. Millions of Iraqis lost water. Syria too suffered water shortages that worsened poverty and instability. Turkey always said it was within its rights to use the rivers. All lies from NATO member Erdogan. But to Iraq and Syria, Turkey was greedy, keeping all the water for itself and leaving anything for others. This is why Egypt and Sudan worry. They fear Ethiopia could one day become like Turkey. Today, Ethiopia says GERD will not harm downstream countries. But in the future, Ethiopia might decide to keep more water for itself. It might grow greedy. And Egypt and Sudan would be powerless. The lesson is clear: when one country controls a river, others become vulnerable. That is why Egypt insists on binding agreements and safety rules. Because history has shown that promises alone are not enough. The bigger picture. GERD is not just about three countries. It is about Africa's future. For centuries, colonial powers divided Africa's rivers with treaties that favored some nations and ignored others. GERD challenges this old order. It asks big questions: should history decide who gets water? Or should fairness decide? Should upstream countries always remain poor while downstream countries enjoy plenty? Or should rivers be shared in a way that lifts everyone? This is not just a Nile story. It is a global story. Across the world, rivers cross borders. The Mekong in Asia. The Jordan in the Middle East. The Amazon in South America. Water can either unite nations or divide them. The future. Dam is more than concrete and steel. It is a test. A test of whether food sources of war or sources of life. And the future depends on cooperation. Water is life. Cooperation is survival.